It's past 1 o'clock, so now that everybody's filtering in, I'm going to call this meeting of the State Government Finance, Elections, Pensions, Transportation Conference Committee to order. Today is May 11th, 2022, and pursuant to House Rule 10.01, this meeting is being held hybrid, virtually, and people in person. Would Mr. Brinks take the roll?
Thank you. Chair Nelson.
Present.
Nelson is present. Chair Hornstein.
Present.
Hornstein is present. Chair Murphy.
Murphy present.
Murphy is present. Representative Cagle.
Present.
Cagle is present. Representative Nash.
Present.
Nash is present. Chair Kiffmeyer.
Present.
Kiffmeyer is present. Chair Newman. Senator Howe. Senator Jasinski. Senator Dibble.
Present.
Dibble is present. With that, Chair, we have a quorum.
With that, members, what we're intending on doing today, we're going to try to get walkthroughs finished on this. We're going to start with the appropriation section of the bill, the spreadsheets.
Mr. Erickson, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Erickson,
Ms. Stengel.
Ms. Daigle will walk us through the spreadsheets for the State Government Finance.
We can't hear.
We can't hear us on Zoom, so staff here, is there something that needs to be turned on, or?
We can't hear.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I forgot we had to turn the microphones on here when we talk. It's just the opposite in the House chamber, in the houses. Anyway, I'll call this meeting to order. Call this meeting to order of the State Government Finance Committee, Conference Committee again. And today, pursuant to House Rule 10.01, this meeting is being held virtually and in person. 1 second here. We're going to do a walkthrough. Start with the walkthrough of the thing, Mr. Erickson. If you can start, and I will get myself on Zoom here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Andrew Erickson with Senate Council Research and Fiscal Analysis, and we'll be walking through the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet that we have in front of us in the binders is time-stamped May 6th at 4:17 p.m. Just to orient you all to the spreadsheet, along the left side, you'll see the agencies and various change items, and then across the top are in 2 separate columns the House and Senate positions. The yellow columns show differences, and green shaded columns are the tails. I'll briefly just walk through the couple of Senate positions and then turn it over to Ms. Roberts, who will walk through the bulk of the House provisions. If you move to line 25 on the Senate position, there is a $6 billion appropriation one time to the Secretary of State. This is for grants to local governments for 3 separate purposes. Local governments can use this to hire temporary staff to help input data into the statewide voter registration system, to purchase paper that complies with the security marking requirements that Ms. Stengel will describe, and also to comply with various live streaming requirements that are in the Senate bill that Ms. Stengel will also describe. You will also see in the tails, there's not a tail on this appropriation, but there is a sunsetting of an existing appropriation or grant program of $1 million for Dropbox grants that the Senate position ends in the tails. If you move down to line 41 under Minute Services, you'll see a $4 million appropriation to Minute to comply with live streaming requirements that are in the bill related to hosting, live streaming, and maintaining that data. That is an ongoing $1 million annual appropriation in the tails. And that is the Senate position. So I will turn it over to Ms. Roberts, who will describe the House position.
This is Helen Roberts from the House Fiscal Staff. Can you all hear me?
Yes. But, Ms. Roberts, wait. Mr. Chair?
One second.
Representative Nelson?
You have your hand up, Representative Murphy.
I don't know where we are in the binder or in what article we are on the spreadsheet.
Representative Murphy, we're on the spreadsheet that's in the binder, and they just described the Senate positions on the spreadsheet.
Under what article in the binder?
That would be Article 1, I believe, is the spreadsheet.
Mr. Chair, I think the tab on the binder, if she's working from the same ones, just says spreadsheets. It's a separate one.
Okay,
Madam.
yeah.
It
Mine
starts
doesn't-
with the state fossil?
What's that?
The spreadsheet that starts with the state fossil or the spreadsheet that starts 5, 6?
This is the Excel spreadsheet so it'd be behind that, behind the state fossil that goes through, there's 9 pages. There's 8 pages, and it starts after the first 8 pages.
Thank you, and there are R8, R9, R1.
There's not an R on it, it's just, at the top it should say State Government Finance Tracking, the tracking sheet. It's a spreadsheet.
Thank you.
With that, Ms. Roberts, if you want to identify yourself and proceed with the House articles?
Yes, I'm Helen Roberts from the House Fiscal Staff. And to begin walking through the House position, the first group of change items is for the House and the Legislative Coordinating Commission, a total of $16.874 million. On line 6 is an operating adjustment for the House of $1.2 million. Line 7, a separate increase. I'm sorry, did you have a question, Representative Murphy?
No, I just,
Okay.
please proceed.
Okay. On line 7, there's a separate increase of $200,000 for the House for security and staffing in the Sergeant at Arms office. On line 8, an operating adjustment of $869,000 each year for the LCC joint offices. On line 9, $185,000 for a diversity and inclusion officer for the entire legislature. On line 10, $252,000 is included for translation services for the legislature. On line 11, $30,000 increase to the LCC for actuarial services for the Pension Commission. On line 12, there's $138,000 for a new legislative task force on aging. And on line 13, $14 million in one-time funding for the revisor of statutes to replace the extend bill drafting system. So that's the total of $16.87 million. The next item is on line 17 for the Attorney General, $2.335 million each year for an operating adjustment. For the Secretary of State, there's a $310,000 increase for 2 change items. On line 22, $210,000 each year for a Chief Information Officer. And then on line 23, $100,000 each year for civic engagement and youth outreach. In addition, you'll see that there is $230,000 is appropriated for the 20% state match for the most recently approved federal election security funding. And these appropriations and the authorized uses are outlined in the side-by-side. And then you'll see the federal allocation is $1.151 million. Moving down to line 31, $5 million in one-time funding for various campaign finance changes, including expanding the definition of express advocacy. Moving down to minute services, there's a total increase of $35.6 million. This is for several change items, including the first one is $1.8 million for the state match for the federal cybersecurity grant program. And it's my understanding that minute may have some updated numbers for this required match. On line 36, 12.4 million for procurement and adoption of cloud-based services. On line 37, 10.25 million for executive branch technology modernization. On line 38, 256,000 for an accessibility assessment of the state's digital service applications. On line 39, 750,000 to create an innovation fund for the Children's Cabinet. And then on line 40, there's $10.2 million for advanced cybersecurity tools. In addition to these general fund amounts, there is also on line 43, you'll see $150,000 from the telecommunications access account in the special revenue fund for supporting accessible technology. And then finally, on line 44 here, you'll see the federal allocation for the cybersecurity grant program. Moving on to the Department of Administration, $10.7 million total increase over the base. The first change is $250,000 for a transfer to the language access service account in the special revenue account. On line 48, 1.9 million for the Procurement Technical Assistance Center and also for a disparity study. Line 49, $630,000 one-time funding for a transfer to the Fleet Fund to address revenue losses. And then on line 50, $301,000 to improve human resources and financial services. This includes hiring an equity coordinator and an additional position in the SMART program, as well as a study of an Office of Small Agencies. Line 51, $556,000 to establish an Office of Enterprise Translations. On line 52, $400,000 for improving grants administration oversight. Line 53, $150,000 to add an alternative dispute resolution specialist to the Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution. On line 54, $773,000 for a one-time grant to AMPers to provide new programs. On line 55, $200,000 for the Minnesota Field Archaeology and Private Cemeteries Act update. On line 56, $1 million in one-time funds for state agency workers' compensation claims incurred prior to March 4th, 2021. And then on line 57, this is the $2.5 million for state worker agency workers' compensation costs for Chapter 32, which was passed early this session, extending the workplace presumption of covered workers' compensation claims. And then finally, on line 58, $2 million in one-time funding for public television block grants. Moving on to Minnesota management and budget, there's a $9 million increase. This includes on line 64, $7.285 million for the state's enterprise systems, including SWIFT, Semaphore, and the data warehouse. On line 65, $1 million each year for administration and staffing of the Children's Cabinet. On line 66, $314,000 to provide outreach and assistance for the capital budget. On line 67, $300,000 for expanded capacity to evaluate and understand the impact of new or expanded state programs. And then on line 68, $93,000 to implement the recommendations of the Task Force on State Employees with Disabilities. Moving down to the Historical Society, a total increase of $1.28 million. On line 78, there's an operating adjustment of $500,000 per year. On line 79, $750,000 in one-time funding for operational support for the reopening of state historical sites. And then on line 80, $32,000 in one-time funding for the State Emblem Commission, which is dealing with the redesign of the state flag. Going down to the Humanities Center, on line 84, there's an increase of $22,000 each year for an operating adjustment. For the Board of Accountancy at the bottom of the page, $120,000 increase for licensing and enforcement program support. Going on to the next page, for the Barbers Examiners Board, There's a one-time cost to the board for implementing licensing modifications, primarily related to programming costs for the mobile barbershop license, and that is $17,000. And then for the cosmetology board on line 96 is a $20,000 increase to the board for implementation of the recent OLA recommendations. So in summary, line 100 shows the total general fund direct expenditures of $76.549 million. I'll jump down to the revenues. There are just some small revenue, general fund revenue changes totaling $3,000 of revenue loss. So again, going down to the bottom of the page, you can see the net general fund change is $76.5 million for fiscal year 22-23.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Are Lexi and Eric, or Alexa and Andrew, are we done then with?
Mr. Chair, with the spreadsheet, yes, but I believe Ms. Stengel is prepared to walk through the campaign articles if there's no questions.
We'll proceed with then the campaign articles and the side-by-sides. And get my page up here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Gehring will start.
Mr. Gehring, if you want to introduce yourself and then proceed.
Mr. Chair, Matt Gehring from House Research. Ms. Stengel and I will walk through the campaign finance and elections article, and we're going to work from the side-by-side comparison summary rather than the side-by-side itself. I don't have the binder in front of me, but it should be the tab that aligns with Article 3 of the House bill and Article 1 of the Senate bill, campaign finance and elections. So to start, the first row you see on the comparison summary is the topic we've got listed there is the House's miscellaneous elections and administration sections. That appears first because of the statutory order of this article. There's a whole series of sections that provide a number of tactical and miscellaneous updates to various elections and administration process. I've got them bullet pointed out on the summary, including updates to the safe at home address confidentiality voting process. Expansion of the types of residential facilities where employees may vouch for residents at that facility when registering to vote. Expansion of the Uniform and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act process to include certain types of deployed emergency response personnel as well as utility workers. Expansion of the authority to deliver absentee ballots in person to residents of Minnesota's veterans homes as well as shelters for battered women. That process would happen in the same way that it does currently for those in hospitals on Election Day. There's also expanded authorization for the use of all mail balloting in towns and small cities across the state. There's a change to the statute that governs the number of people a person may assist in a polling place on Election Day to conform to a recent court decision overturning that limit. There's in Section 45 language requiring the state canvassing board to declare the state and federal candidates who receive the highest number of votes for each office to be elected to that office. And then there's also some changes to the timeline that applies to special legislative elections. And all those sections are sort of scattered throughout this article. We've sort of lumped them together because of the number of them on this row.
Thank you, Mr. Gehring. Ms. Stengel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Alexis Stengel, Senate Counsel. On page 2 of the side-by-side, well, first I should note on the first page of the comparison document, it refers to Senate Article 1. That's a typo. The campaign finance and election items are in Article 6 of the Senate file, so that was just a typo. Apologies for that. So we're looking at sections that are in Article 6. So there are several Senate-only provisions on R1 through R4 of the document, and these lower registration thresholds from $750 to $200 for when a candidate will have to register with the board.
And then, Mr. Chair, on page R2 of the election side-by-side, page 2 of the summary, you'll see a row, it's a House-only row that expands the definition of expressly advocating. This is the term that's used in law to determine whether an independent expenditure is actually an independent expenditure that requires reporting to the Campaign Finance Board. And then House Section 3, Senate Section 6, similar language in both bodies in terms of their structure. There's some stylistic and structural differences between the two, but the general takeaway of these two sections is an attempt to limit the contributions that lobbyists can make to candidates for office that would secure them special access to a facility or event space during a legislative session.
Mr. Chair and members, on line 5, there are some Senate-only provisions, Senate Section 7 through 11 and 39, and these have to do with voter registration data. The sections classify all of the data in the SVRS as public data with some limited exceptions, and consolidates provisions from various areas in law and puts them into one section and makes some conforming changes to that.
And then, Mr. Chair, the next two rows you see on the summary are House-only rows. It's sort of two clumps of policy. The first row is really the biggest set of sections that exist in this article, is some grammatical updates to the way that the law refers to a person's residence. So instead of referring to a place where a voter resides, instead the statutes would refer to a place where a voter maintains residence. The next is a series of sections that change various timelines related to counting and opening absentee and mail ballots. There's a number of conforming changes within these sections, but the sort of big takeaway is that absentee ballots would be permitted to be opened beginning 14 days before the election, as opposed to the current standard, which is 7 days prior to the election.
Mr. Chair, members, the items on line 8 are various changes that are Senate only. And these sections include shortening the timeline for entering same-day voter registration and voter history, so that's done before the canvass of the election. It modifies requirements on disclosure of election results and consolidates the two sections in law. It prohibits local governments from imposing vaccine requirements for election judges or members of a ballot board. It prohibits contributions from corporations or nonprofits or other entities given to local governments for election expenses. Instead of publishing the sample ballot, it creates a new type of ballot called a generic ballot, and that's what's published instead of the current requirements. It modifies notice requirements of public accuracy testing, requires it to be done 14 days in advance, and notice must be given to the major political parties. It requires the Secretary of State to report on the use of certain funds from the bill last year and the bill this year, and then includes a general effective date for July 1. Although various other sections do have different effective dates. The next line, line 9, is several sections that are identical between the House and Senate, and these update and correct absentee ballot terminology. Sort of over time, envelopes have been referred to by the improper name, and this is just cleaning that up. On line 10, there are some Senate-only provisions, and these relate to absentee voting. Makes a variety of changes, including returning ballots in person, where polling places can be and when they must be available, amends who could be on a ballot board, establishes a new position called a ballot board observer that observes all ballot board activities, and requires ballot board activities to be live streamed. On the next line, there is a similar concept but is treated somewhat differently between the two, so I'll talk about the Senate approach, and Mr. Gehring can chime in with the House approach. And these relate to absentee ballot drop boxes. Both sides sort of make several changes. The Senate includes some additional requirements about location, where the boxes can be located, the signs that must be on them, requiring logs of when the boxes are emptied and the number of ballots and those sorts of things, and requires reports about the number of ballots taken out. Each ballot box must be continually live streamed during the absentee period, and the Secretary of State is prohibited from making rules related to drop boxes. And Mr. Gehring, I'll pause here for you to chime in.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the House approach is similar in some respects, but does have a little bit different policy. So one item of House policy that you see here that's House only is a minimum standard for the number of drop boxes that may be located in each jurisdiction. So there must be at least one location for every 50,000 registered voters in a jurisdiction, or a minimum of at least one if there are fewer than 50,000 voters in a jurisdiction. And then there's some additional language about distribution of the drop boxes if there are multiple locations that are required.
And then, Mr. Chair, on the top of page 5, line number 12, there are some Senate-only sections related to absentee ballots. These sections require absentee ballots to have a security marking on the ballot, and that must be verified by the ballot board before that ballot can be accepted. And the Secretary of State is required to establish a state contract for ballot paper that has the required security marking.
Then, Mr. Chair, the next couple of sections are House-only sections, and we're going to jump all the way to page R46 of the actual side-by-side to find those. We're moving into the Fair Campaign Practices Act amendments here. House Section 55 is House-only. It requires independent expenditure disclaimers to list the top 3 contributors to each expenditure. So the existing disclaimer requirement would apply, and there would be additional information on the top 3 contributors on each disclaimer. House Sections 56 and 57 relate to the way that the disclaimer must be printed on small advertisements where it's sort of impractical to put a full disclaimer. These House sections, in effect, require the Campaign Finance Board to adopt rules that specify the form and content of the disclaimer that will be required on these types of advertisements. So, for example, web ads and social media ads, that sort of thing. House Section 58 and Senate Section 37 is sort of similar in concept, but it does have some structural differences. The language here requires certain types of notices to be printed on mailings that are sent by private organizations that include either an absentee ballot application or a sample ballot. There's on the House side some specific wording that must be used for those notices that identify, but that make clear to the recipient that the materials included are not an official ballot, and that if there's a sample ballot included, that it's not an official ballot that may be voted. And then I'll let Ms. Stengel describe the Senate approach to that section.
Mr. Chair and members, I think generally speaking, the Senate version does the same thing. It has some specific language not included in the House version that relates to absentee ballot applications and prohibiting them from being pre-filled with voter data.
Then the last policy topic, Mr. Chair, is House Section 59 and 61. This is House-only language. It comes from Representative Greenman's bill that establishes some remedies for intimidation and interference with the work of elections officials. They're both there's a series of types of activities that are prohibited, and remedies that include both civil enforcement as well as criminal enforcement to prevent those activities from occurring. And Mr. Chair, that's the end of the elections and campaign finance article.
Thank you, Mr. Gehring. Thank you, Ms. Stengel. Seeing no hands here on the board for questions, why don't we proceed next to the pension portion of the bill and get a walkthrough on that? And
Mr. Chair, I believe just Ms. Roberts will be walking through those provisions. The Senate does not have
I believe Ms. Lancheski from the Pension Commission was going to walk through those for her. She has a better understanding. Ms. Lancheski, welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record, and you can proceed.
Thank you, Representative Nelson. My name is Susan Lancheski. I'm the Executive Director of the Legislative Commission on Pensions and Retirement. There is a summary of these 4 articles in the materials provided to you for the meeting today. I'll very quickly go through Articles 7 through 10. Article 7 requires each public pension plan except the legislator's plan to pay a lump sum COLA on January 31, 2023, and again on January 31, 2024 to all retirees. The COLA amount is 2.5% of the annual amount paid to the retiree during the preceding calendar year. This would be in addition to COLAs retirees receive under current law. Article 8 reduces the actuarial assumption for investment rate of return for all the public pension plans from 7.5% to 7%. This is an assumption used by the plan's actuaries to value liabilities and determine funded status and contribution sufficiency or deficiency. Article 9 increases annual state aids paid to 3 pension plans by 50% and extends the expiration date of these aids to 2068. The 3 plans are the Parapolice and Fire Plan, St. Paul Teachers Retirement Fund Association, and the Judges Plan. Article 10 provides a one-time appropriation of $390 million to all the public pension plans. The appropriation is to be allocated on the basis of market value of plan assets as of the most recent June 30th. This means that each plan will receive an allocation that is in the same proportion that that plan's assets bear to the total assets of all pension plans. And that's my summary of the articles.
Thank you, Ms. Linczewski. Seeing no questions here. What's the next thing? You were going to go to that thing? That's it? Ms. Roberts.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Roberts, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I think we are done with the walkthrough.
Okay. I just was handed a note to call on you. With that, people, with that, members, and people in the audience, I think we're done with the walkthrough for today. I think I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Chair Kiffmeyer. I believe she's planning a meeting tomorrow, but I'll let her announce that, and we'll go from there. And if there's anything that Mr. Newman, or Senator Newman, or Representative Hornstein want to say, we can do that afterwards. Ms. Kiffmeyer, right, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, we will be holding a conference committee hearing tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock, and the intention is to go through same and similar on state government, the general policy provisions, or anything else we might have agreed to, of course, but certainly in that regard.
Got to learn to turn that back on. Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll speak also for my colleague, Chair Newman, that we are prepared with about 19 or so same and similar provisions that we'll be moving tomorrow. So appreciate that.
With that, members, under any questions, Senator Dibble, Representative Cagle, seeing shaking of heads, no. With that, members, we are adjourned for today.